I have told this story to very few people, not because it reflects badly on me, though it does somewhat, but because Aldrich Carrmoor is a man who spent 7 years in silence, and I feel it is not quite my right to speak for him even now. Still, he asked me to. He said, "Prentice, you were there for all of it. You are the only one who can do it honestly." And so I will try. My name is Prentice Hale. I have been the Duke of Carrmoor's closest friend since we were 17 years old, and equally unsuited to the academic rigors of Thornfield College. We have grown into different kinds of men. Aldrich has grown into a reputation that precedes him into every room and silences conversation upon his arrival. I have grown into a comfortable bachelor who inherits a modest estate and attends too many dinner parties. But we have always been honest with one another. It is the only thing I would ask you to believe about him before I begin. Whatever else you may have heard of the most feared duke in the northern counties, and you have heard plenty, I am sure, he has always been honest with me. The rest of this is about Nora Weld. I met her for the first time 7 years before that autumn at Carrmoor, though met is perhaps too strong a word. I was visiting a friend at Aldenmere Park, that grand, somewhat drafty estate belonging to the late Lady Sophronia Aldenmere, and Nora Weld was the lady's maid who brought the afternoon tea. A young woman of perhaps 23, with the kind of quiet competence that good households run on and never mention. She did not speak unless addressed. She did not look at the guests with the hungry curiosity of a woman who wished to be one of them. She looked, if she looked at anything, at the task immediately before her. Aldrich was also visiting. He had known Lady Sophronia in the way that ducal families know one another, a long acquaintance of mutual regard and very little warmth. He sat in the corner of the drawing-room and observed the company with his customary expression, which is to say no expression at all, while the rest of us competed for Lady Sophronia's witticisms. I noticed Nora Weld because she dropped a spoon. It rang against the marble surround of the fireplace, and everyone looked, which made her cheeks go very pink, and she retrieved it and was gone from the room in under a minute, and that was the whole of it. Except that I noticed, as she left, that Aldrich was watching the door after she had passed through it. Aldrich Carrmoor is not a man who watches doors. I said nothing. He would have said nothing in return, and we would have irritated one another, and that would have been the end of it. We went back to our respective lives. Lady Sophronia died 2 years later, as the very old do, and her estate was dissolved and her household staff dispersed. I did not think of Nora Weld. Aldrich did. This is the part I did not know until he told me, years later, with the kind of flat honesty that costs him something to produce. He had made inquiries, not of the dramatic sort. He had not hired investigators or interrogated the Aldenmere solicitors. He had simply, quietly, made it his business to know where the members of Lady Sophronia's household landed. He had a contact in the employment registry, as most men of property do. And when he learned that Nora Weld had been placed as a seamstress's assistant in a village 3 hours north, and that she was struggling to pay her rent in the second winter, he arranged to have it paid. Anonymously, through a solicitor, under the name of the Aldenmere Estate Trust, which no longer technically existed, but which he had funded for precisely this purpose. I did not know any of this. He did not tell me. He told no one. He paid her rent for 4 years. When she moved, which she did twice, always toward better work, always with the careful determination of a woman who will not be beaten by circumstance, he followed. When she needed a reference for a position as a housekeeper's assistant at Greenville Manor, a reference arrived for her, written on paper bearing no name she could trace, praising her diligence and her character and her meticulous care for the households in which she had served. She got the position. She believed, I am told, that these things were the residue of Lady Sophronia's generosity, some bequest she had been too modest to name, administered quietly by the estate. It was the only explanation that made sense. Nora Weld was not a woman given to fanciful conclusions. She was, however, a woman who noticed things. I know this because by the time she arrived at Carrmoor Hall, by the time Aldrich finally, after 7 years, did something that put her directly before him, she had already begun to suspect that the Aldenmere Estate Trust was not quite what she had imagined. The trust, as she had looked into it during a brief period of clerical work at a solicitor's office, had no surviving beneficiaries and no recorded administrator. It existed on paper, and the paper led nowhere she could follow. But that was for later. First she had to arrive. Aldrich offered me no explanation when he told me, in the second week of October, that he was advertising for a new head housekeeper at Carrmoor. Mrs. Fell, who had held the position for 11 years, was retiring to her sister's cottage in the south, and the estate needed capable hands. I said this seemed entirely sensible. He said yes. And then he said, very carefully, that there was a candidate he had identified through the employment registry whom he believed to be exceptionally qualified, and that he intended to offer her the position if she agreed to the terms. He said her name. I put down my glass. "Aldrich," I said. "She is exceptionally qualified," he said. "You have been paying her rent for 4 years. 7, he said, and then looked briefly as though he wished he had not said it. There was a silence between us of the kind that only old friendship can sustain. "You have never spoken to her?" I said. "No. She does not know you exist." "She knows the Aldenmere Estate Trust exists," he said. "She does not know what it is." "And you intend to bring her to your estate," I said slowly, "without telling her." "I intend to offer her a position she is genuinely suited for," he said, "and to pay her what she is worth and to leave it at that." I looked at him for a long moment. He looked back with the composed, unreadable patience that has made lesser men believe he feels nothing. "Aldrich," I said, "she is going to find out." "Perhaps," he said. "She will be furious." He was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps," he said again. And then, in a voice I had never quite heard from him before, "Or perhaps she will understand." Nora Weld arrived on a Thursday in late October, when the light at Carrmoor comes in low and flat across the moor and the house looks, from the long approach, like something drawn in charcoal against a pewter sky. The oaks along the drive had dropped most of their leaves, and they lay in drifts along the gravel, copper, and pale gold, so that the carriage wheels made a sound like distant applause as it came. I happened to be visiting. I come in autumn always. Aldrich shoots well, and I shoot badly but enjoy the air and the quiet. And I was standing at the library window with my afternoon coffee when the hired carriage came down the drive. She stepped out with a single traveling bag and stood for a moment looking up at the house. Not with the wide, slightly alarmed expression that Carrmoor often produces in those seeing it for the first time. It is a severe house, all gray stone and narrow windows, and a front elevation that suggests the architecture was designed by someone who mistrusted comfort, but with a kind of deliberate assessment, as though she were cataloging what she saw and deciding how much of it required adjustment. She was 30 now, or thereabouts. 7 years had given her a steadiness that the girl at the tea table had been too young to fully possess, a quality of stillness that is not passivity but its precise opposite. She wore a dark wool coat, and her hair was gathered under a practical hat, and she looked at Carrmoor Hall the way a woman looks at something she has already decided to meet on equal terms. I stepped back from the window. Aldrich met her in the entrance hall. I was not present, but Aldrich told me afterward, with the careful economy of a man editing himself, that she had been composed and direct from the first moment. She had shaken his hand without the slight over-formality most people perform when meeting a duke for the first time, and she had asked 3 questions about the estate's staff structure before he had finished offering her tea, and she had listened to his answers with an attentiveness that was, he said, disconcerting. "Disconcerting," I said. "She does not look away when she is thinking," he said. "Most people look away. She keeps looking as though she has decided that what is in front of her is worth the attention." He said this the way a man says something he has been turning over for some time and has only just found the words for. She was given the tour of the house by the deputy housekeeper, and I saw her that evening at the household supper, where the upper staff ate at a separate table from the main dining room. I was passing through the corridor, and the door was open. She was listening to the cook describe a recent difficulty with the larder deliveries, and she was making a small note in a pocketbook, and she had the focused quiet of someone who understands that the first weeks in any house are for listening. I thought, she has no idea. The following days settled into a rhythm. Nora Weld proved, as Aldrich had said, exceptionally qualified. Carrmoor is not a simple house to manage. It has 42 rooms in active use, a staff of 30, and the particular demands of a man who says very little and expects a great deal, and has been known to reduce capable housekeepers to resentful resignation within the first winter. Nora Weld did not appear to be heading toward resentful resignation. She moved through the house with the steady confidence of someone who has already mapped it in her mind, and when the Duke passed her in the corridor, which happened several times a day, the house being what it is, She acknowledged him with a professional nod and returned to whatever she had been doing. He watched her. He thought I did not notice. I have been noticing Aldrich Carrmoor for 20 years. It was on the 6th day that something shifted. One of the kitchen maids had fallen ill with a winter fever, and by morning 2 more had followed, and by afternoon it was clear that the below-stairs operations were going to be stretched to their limits. The cook was herself unwell by nightfall. The footmen were managing the dining room on reduced staff. It was the kind of domestic crisis that exposes a household's character almost immediately, that separates those who manage from those who wait for someone else to do it. Nora Weld set aside the distinctions of rank. She was in the kitchen by 6 in the morning, sleeves rolled, her hair pinned back with the brisk practicality of someone who does not consider the hour. She directed what remained of the staff with the same quiet authority she brought to everything, clear, unhurried, specific, never raising her voice because she did not need to. She knew apparently how to make soup, good soup, the restorative kind that uses the bones of last night's supper and the herbs from the kitchen garden, and requires nothing more than patience and attention. And she knew how to assign tasks to a skeleton crew without making them feel skeletal. And she did both without drama or complaint or a single moment of visible distress. When Aldrich came downstairs at his usual hour and found his breakfast appearing with its usual precision despite the morning's considerable chaos, he stood in the doorway of the breakfast room for a long moment, looking at the table set exactly as it always was before sitting down. I watched him process this. He ate in silence, which is not unusual, but he ate with a particular thoughtfulness that was. He sent a note downstairs before noon, thanking the staff for their effort under difficult circumstances. He had never, to my knowledge, sent such a note before. The cook, recovered enough to read it 2 days later, said that in 11 years of service she had never received written thanks from the Duke of Carrmoor, and that it was either the fever talking or something had changed. Something had changed. I found him in the library that evening. He was standing at the window with a glass of brandy he had not drunk, looking at the frost forming on the garden. "You should tell her," I said. He did not pretend not to know what I meant. We have been friends long enough. "Not yet," he said. "She is going to find the trust in the household accounts," I said. "She is meticulous, Aldrich. She is going to find every paper in this house that wants finding." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "She is not yet comfortable here." "She seems perfectly comfortable." "She is professional," he said. "That is not the same thing," he paused. "I do not want her to feel," he stopped. "Trapped," I said. He turned from the window. "Obligated," he said. That was the word. I understood then, in a way I had not quite managed before, what the 7 years had cost him. Not money, money was irrelevant to him, and he would have given 10 times what he had given without noticing. What it had cost him was the alternative. He could have approached her. He could have made himself known. He had a title and an estate and the means to offer her security without subterfuge. But he had been afraid, and Aldrich Carrmoor is afraid of very little. That obligation would be all he could offer her, and that obligation is not the same as being wanted. He had chosen, instead, to be useful at a distance. "She will be furious," I said again. "Yes," he said. "But you are going to tell her anyway." He was quiet for a long time. The frost thickened on the glass. Below us, the lights of the kitchen showed warm through the stone, and if we listened, and we did, we could just hear the sound of the household settling into its evening. "She asked me today," he said, "how long the Aldenmere Estate Trust had been supporting the household funds." I went still. "She found it in the accounts," he said. "The trust made a contribution to the Carrmoor Staff Emergency Fund 3 years ago. I had forgotten it was still in the records. She is thorough." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was a long-standing charitable arrangement." "Aldrich." "I know," he said. "You have 24 hours at most." He set down the brandy glass. "I know," he said again. He told her the next morning. He asked me afterward whether I would like to know what was said, and I told him that I would, and so he told me, in the careful, honest, edited way he tells me things, which means the facts are accurate and the feelings are present but have been pressed very flat by the time they reach me. He had asked to speak with her in the estate office. Not the drawing room, not the library, the office, which is a working room with ledgers and account books and the kind of furniture that does not invite anyone to feel out of place. She had come in with her pocketbook, expecting a professional conversation. He had told her about the trust, about the rent, about the reference, about all of it. 7 years, itemized, with the same directness she herself used when discussing the household accounts. She had been silent for quite a long time. Then she had said, "The reference was yours." "Yes," he said. "The coal in the winter of the first year." "Yes." "And the rent," she looked at him steadily. "You have been paying my rent for 7 years." "Not continuously," he said. "You began paying it yourself after the 3rd year. I only supplemented when the situation required it." "That," she said, "is not the distinction you seem to believe it is." He said he had not argued the point. She stood and walked to the window, which looks out over the kitchen garden. He waited. He has always, he said, been better at waiting than any other thing. "I believed it was Lady Sophronia," she said at last. "I believed she had left some instruction, some provision." "I know." "That was a kindness." She turned. Her voice was even, but her hands, he said, were clasped very tightly. "It allowed me to accept it without feeling that I owed a debt I could not identify. If I had known it was you," she stopped. "You would not have accepted it," he said. "No," she said, "I would not." "I know that too," he said. "It is why I did not tell you." Another silence. She looked at him, the looking without looking away that he had noted at the beginning, and he looked back. "You do not know me," she said. "We have never spoken. We were in the same room once at Aldenmere 7 years ago, and you did not speak to me." "No," he said. "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment. "You dropped a spoon," he said, "and when everyone looked, you did not apologize or collapse or look for someone else to manage it. You picked it up, and you left the room with exactly as much dignity as you had come in with." She stared at him. "I thought," he said, "that was a very fine thing to do." He told me this as though it were a practical observation about character, and I suppose it was. But I have known Aldrich since we were 17, and I know what it costs him to say a thing like that out loud. She was quiet for a long time after he said it. Then she sat down, not in her original chair, but in the one closer to the desk, as though she had decided, while standing at the window, to take up a different position entirely. "You have been managing my life," she said, "from a distance." "I have been ensuring you were not prevented from managing it yourself," he said. "I did not choose your employers. I did not arrange your positions. I made sure the floor did not collapse beneath you. And now you have brought me here. I have offered you a position," he said. "The position is genuine. Your qualifications are genuine. If you wish to leave, I will provide a reference, a complete and honest one, not an anonymous one, and arrange your transportation, and that will be the end of it." She did not look away. "And if I do not wish to leave?" He was silent long enough, he told me, that he was afraid he had misunderstood her. Then he said, "Then you stay. And I will answer any question you care to ask, and keep no further secrets, and you will know exactly who is standing in front of you." She looked at him for a moment longer. "Then I have a question," she said. "Yes." "All those years," she said, "did you want something in return?" He said no. She studied his face. Whatever she was looking for, I think she found it because her clasped hands loosened slightly. "That is either the truth," she said, "or you are a remarkably good liar." "Ask Prentice Hale," he said. "He has been trying to catch me in a lie for 20 years and has not managed it yet." I did not know until he told me that he had said this. I confess I was rather moved, but I kept that to myself. She stayed. Not immediately. She asked for a day, and she spent it walking the grounds in the flat October light, and I saw her once from a distance, standing at the edge of the kitchen garden with her arms folded and her face tilted toward the gray sky, thinking with the particular concentration of a woman who has always had to think for herself. I did not approach her. It was not my thinking to interrupt. That evening she came to Aldrich in the library. I was there. He had not asked me to leave, which was itself a statement. And she came in with the directness that I had first noticed at Aldenmere and had come to recognize as simply the way she was. "I am going to stay," she said, "as the housekeeper. The arrangement is professional, and the terms are fair, and I am good at this work." "Yes," he said. And I am going to ask you something. He waited. Every year at Christmas, she said, a small parcel arrived, books mostly, once a very good pair of gloves, no name. He said nothing. That was also you, she said. A pause, yes. She looked at him with something that was not quite anger anymore and not quite forgiveness, but something on the long road between them. You knew what I was reading, she said. The books were always what I would have chosen. You left a list, he said, in Lady Sophronia's lending library 7 years ago, books you had not been able to locate. I kept it. She made a sound that might have been a short, involuntary breath. You kept a list. I am thorough, he said very quietly, in my own way. There was a silence then of a different quality, not the silence of an interrogation or of a decision being made, but the silence of two people who have suddenly, in the same moment, seen a thing clearly. 7 years is a long time, she said. Yes, he said. You are not what people say you are. People say a great deal. They say you are incapable of feeling anything. I am aware of what they say. She looked at him steady, open, the kind of looking that his composure could not quite redirect. You are, in fact, she said, the most patient man I have ever encountered. He did not answer that. But I saw his face, and I will tell you because I promised him honesty. He looked, for just a moment, like a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told he may set it down. I left the library shortly after. I'm a great believer in knowing when to leave a room. The winter at Carrmoor that year was long and still and very cold, and the house ran with an order and a warmth it had not quite had before, and I visited in December and found things between Aldrich and Nora Weld in a state of careful, mutual negotiation. The kind that happens when two private people are learning the particular grammar of one another. She brought him his correspondence at the same hour each morning and sometimes, if the matter warranted it, gave him her opinion of it, and he listened with an attention that was, frankly, unlike anything I had observed him give to another human being. He gave her in return the kind of honesty he had given very few people in his life. He told her in pieces over the months that followed about the years of watching from a distance, not as a confession, but as an answer to her questions, of which there were many and none of which were small. She asked them in the direct, undeflected way she did everything, and he answered them, and I think this exchange, more than anything else, was what undid him entirely. A man like Aldrich Carrmoor, I have come to believe, does not fall in love the way other men do. He does not fall. He is eroded slowly by someone who will not be redirected or managed or kept at a comfortable distance until the composure gives way and the thing underneath it, which was always vast, always patient, always waiting, comes into the open. By spring it had come into the open. He told her on a morning in April, in the estate office where he had first confessed the trust, and he told her in the same direct way he had told her everything else, because he had run out of other ways to be. The apple trees in the kitchen garden were just beginning to show white blossom at the windows, and the light was the light of a morning that has not yet decided what kind of day it will be, and he stood in the middle of the room rather than behind the desk because he could not, he told me, manage the desk's distance. He told her that the 7 years were not an impulse, or a duty, or a charitable abstraction, that the list she had left in Lady Sophronia's library was still in his coat pocket, worn at the folds from years of folding and unfolding, because he had never quite been able to leave it in a drawer where it would be only a piece of paper. That he had brought her to Carrmoor not only because she was qualified, which she was, but because he had not been able to find another way to be in the same room with her that did not involve deception, and he was very tired of deception. That every winter, sending the books, he had stood in a bookseller's in the city and thought, this one, this is the one she would have chosen, and had been right, he hoped. He had very much hoped he was right. That he was aware he had no right to any of this. That he was asking her, honestly, and with full knowledge that she could refuse, and that her position was secure, and her good reference was already written and sitting in the estate solicitor's files. Whether she might consider in time, at whatever pace she chose, whether there was something here worth holding on to. He stopped speaking. The apple blossom moved at the window. She looked at him for a very long time. You kept the list, she said. Yes. All that time. She looked at the window for a moment and then looked back. You knew what I was reading, what I was wanting to read, and you, she stopped. Then quietly, Did it occur to you that you might have simply spoken to me at any point in 7 years? He was quiet. Yes, he said. Frequently. And he looked at her directly. I was afraid, he said, that you would feel you owed me something, and I did not want that to be the first thing between us. She was silent for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not softening exactly, but a shift, the way a landscape changes when a cloud passes off the sun. You are, she said at last, a very complicated man, Your Grace. I have been told so, he said. I am not certain whether to be grateful or furious. You were furious in October, he said. I had hoped perhaps for a movement toward gratitude. She made that short, involuntary sound again, almost a laugh but not quite, as though she had not expected it to escape. She looked at him with an expression that was, I think, the closest thing to astonishment she allowed herself. Then she put out her hand, not a formal gesture, not a period greeting, but simply her hand extended across the space between them, open, with the steady confidence of a woman who has always known her own mind, and is simply now choosing to act on it. He looked at it, he looked at her. Then, with a care that I think surprised them both, he took her hand in both of his. That is how I think of them when I think of them, which is often, because I am, as I have said, rather moved by the whole affair, though I keep this largely to myself. Nora Weld, who picked up a spoon with dignity in a room full of people looking at her, and who survived 7 winters on her own terms, and who asked every question that mattered when the time came to ask them. And Aldrich Carrmoor, who kept a reading list in his pocket for 7 years and called it nothing because he was not sure what it was, until she put her hand across a desk in April and made it something he could name. He told me once, near the end of that spring, that he had been afraid she would feel she owed him something. Did she? I asked. No, he said, and he said it with the satisfaction of a man who has learned that the thing he feared most is the thing that never came. She told me, he said, that she does not accept debts she did not agree to, and that 7 years of anonymous kindness, however well-intentioned, is not a debt but a history, and that a history, if she chooses to honor it, is only hers to honor. I said that sounded like her. Yes, he said. And I saw it again, that look of a man who has set something heavy down and found, to his great surprise, that he does not miss the weight. I am not a man given to ceremony, and I will not pretend I delivered this account with any great flourish. I was there for most of it, and I have tried to tell it honestly, as he asked. The only thing I will add, because it is the thing I think matters most. Carrmoor Hall that winter and the springs that followed it was a different kind of house than it had been before. Not louder, neither of them are loud, but steadier. And warmer. And in the evenings, if you passed the library, you might see the lamp still burning long after the household had retired, and 2 people sitting, not always talking, comfortable in the particular silence of those who have nothing left to hide. That, I think, is the whole of it. That is what 7 years of patience and 1 honest autumn produced. And if you ask me whether it was worth it, the waiting, the secrecy, the long and roundabout road, I would tell you to ask Nora Weld. She would look at you directly, without looking away. And then she would say yes.